I'm recording my homily for the second Sunday of Easter, this is 2018, which is Divine Mercy Sunday. And so, one of the things I've been wondering about or just thinking about was when St. John Paul II decided to dedicate a Sunday to the devotion of the Divine Mercy, which finds its origins in St. Faustina and her writings, who's also from Poland, just like St. John Paul II, is why he chose this Sunday. Why did he choose the second Sunday of Easter in order to have that be the Sunday for Divine Mercy? Because I think when we think about mercy, we often would think about it being during Lent, right? I mean, Lent is about confession and purification and sacrifice and mercy, and so why not during Lent? So I want to go into a little bit, just a couple thoughts about just the nature of mercy and how it ties into the resurrection and into that victory of Jesus Christ. And so the first thing before I go into the scriptures is just for us to remember, so everything that Jesus did, everything he desired was to bring about true love, right? True love, whether it's between us and God, between us and the Trinity, or between each other as his creatures, brothers and sisters, that we manifest true love. Now, what happens when love gets broken? Well, when love gets broken, there's a need for mercy. And so mercy is an expression of love when love gets broken. It's the bandage, it's the healing balm that we use when love is broken. And so that's the nature of what I want to get at is what happens when love gets broken? Well, that's when we need mercy. So if we go to the gospel, right from the very beginning, you have an example of where mercy is needed. I forgot to tell you. So I'm actually here at Alki Point. This is in Seattle. Little diversion here. This is in Seattle, so I'm here for my Jesu Caritas meeting, which is a group of priests. We get together once a month. And so I have the meeting in about an hour, and I had a little extra time, so I came down to Alki Point. Right behind me is downtown Seattle. You might be able to see it on the screen, maybe not. It's kind of a smoggy day. Okay, anyways, getting back. Little rabbit trail there. So in the gospel, you have the resurrection account. This is from the Gospel of John, right? And so Jesus comes and he appears to the disciples on that first Sunday, the day of the resurrection. So this is the first part of the gospel reading. There's a moment here where the disciples must have really wondered, because Mary Magdalene comes to them and says, Jesus is risen, Jesus is risen. And so you can imagine there's a moment where when they begin to believe that there's joy, it's like, yes, everything he said is true, it's wonderful, it's great. But remember, the last time these disciples saw Jesus was in the garden when they were fleeing him, when they were abandoning him. And so Jesus fulfills everything that he said, and there he is. He's rising from the dead, but is he going to come back to them? I mean, they abandoned him. If he's rising from the dead, it's like this new beginning. Maybe he's going to pick another 12 men, right? Maybe he's just going to abandon them and say, hey, you abandoned me, I'm abandoning you. I'm going to find some other people. So there must have been this moment where they had to have wondered if, because in true righteousness, he had every right to choose different people to be his disciples. But he didn't. He went back to them. And so the very act of the resurrection, the very moment of the resurrection, he's showing mercy. He's showing mercy to his disciples who abandoned him. And so we can't separate the resurrection from mercy. The resurrection is, in a sense, an act of mercy in how he decided to manifest it. And so that should give us great hope, because like the disciples, we're not perfect. And Jesus Christ, when he demonstrates his victory, it's not victory over us, it's a victory to unite us, it's a victory with us, to draw us in closer. So that is the first expression of mercy, in the gospel today, and I think how it ties into the resurrection. And it's not just a Lenten thing, right? The second is in the gospel today, Jesus, as he comes back to his disciples who are broken and need healing, and as he comes back to them and he shows his love for them and he wants to rebuild that love, he gives them a mission. And in part of that mission, he says, whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven, and whose sins you retain, they are retained. And so, in the very essence of the mission that he's giving them to go proclaim the gospel, he's creating the sacrament of reconciliation, the sacrament of confession, which is a sacrament of mercy. You know, I have a priest friend who told me many years ago, he says, remember that when you preach, when you give your homily, you preach like a lion, but when you go in the confessional, you hear confessions like a lamb. And it's not that it's mutually exclusive, right? There's obviously, in our preaching, we need to be understanding and consoling. And just like in confession, sometimes we need to challenge people a little bit. But by and large, the sacrament is not to rebuke somebody, it's not to castigate them, it's to show God's mercy, it's to heal. And so right in the middle of this first moment that Jesus is back in the resurrection, he's giving his disciples the authority which only God has to forgive sins. He's giving that to his disciples, this priestly authority to forgive sins. And so he's giving them the mission of mercy. So that's number two. You know, there's ways in the resurrection we never even really thought about how mercy was just really so tied into it. The third act of mercy in the gospel today is Thomas. Thomas, right? Thomas is a good guy. Thomas is like all of us. Thomas is a little slow in truly embracing the need for faith, the need to trust Jesus, to surrender his will, right? As Americans, we like being in control. We like being in control, right? We like planning everything out. We like to plan our whole life out. We like to plan every single detail out. And if you don't believe me, just listen to somebody who's planning their wedding. They plan every single detail down to the last minute, down to the last dollar, down to the last person. And you almost feel like when you're listening to them that it's just like, it just suffocates the life out of it. It's like there's no openness for spontaneity or even for joy. It's like it's more planned than a business convention. And so Jesus wants us to break free from that desire to control in which we suffocate things, right? So Thomas, he comes in and he's in control. He says, I will not believe. I will not believe unless I can put my finger in his nail marks, unless I can put my hand in his side. He's like saying, unless I can have absolute control, even over Jesus Christ and his resurrection, I'm not going to believe. So the gospel continues on. 8 days later, Jesus comes back. Thomas is there. Now, what does Jesus do? Jesus could have said, you know, Thomas, man, after all this time, you still don't get it. You're still acting like a nincompoop. You know, sorry, I didn't have a better word than that. But he could have said to him, you know, you're out of here. You're out of here. I don't need you. I don't need that. He didn't do that, did he? What did he do? He showed him mercy by allowing him to do exactly what he desired. Now, it kind of backfires on Thomas, right? Because he allows him. He says, come on, Thomas, put your finger here. You can imagine as Thomas is doing it, just the amount of shame he would have felt. Here Jesus is being so loving towards him and how he was so stiff-necked, how he was so cold about it. And as he's putting his hand into his side to feel where Jesus had been pierced, just that shame of realizing how he had gotten it completely wrong. But Jesus' mercy conquers, and he conquers Thomas's heart. And so Thomas has that moment where he says, my Lord and my God, my Lord and my God. He says, you are in control. Our lives are about you, not about ourselves, right? When I was growing up as a kid, I remember when we were in Mass and the priest would be holding up the Eucharist after the consecration, and I'd always hear my mom whisper, "My Lord and my God." And the priest would hold up the chalice, and my mom would whisper, "My Lord and my God." And as a kid, I just figured, I guess that's a mom thing. They taught that in mom school or something. But later, realized it's like, she was quoting Thomas. She was quoting Thomas after he had come back and woken back up. By God's mercy, right? By God's mercy. I'm going to go a little bit deeper with the mercy. So let's go to the second reading. So I'm going backwards through the reading. So I started with the gospel. I'm going to go to the second reading, and then I'm going to go to the first reading. So the second reading is one of the letters, I think it's the first letter of John. And John's got this beautiful dissertation on what love is, right? So we talked about love. Now, I want to take love and mercy, and I want to put it in the context of something else Jesus actually mentioned in the gospel. 3 times he comes to the disciples and he says, "Peace be with you." The bishop does that when he comes and celebrates Mass with us, right? The bishop says, "Peace be with you." And so Jesus says, "Peace be with you." And I think you get at the very heart of what Jesus desires for us. What he desires is peace, right? But true peace. True peace. True peace is not just a bunch of people not fighting, or a bunch of people kind of getting along, but just having their space, so we're never really doing anything together. We just coexist. That's not truly peace, at least the peace that Jesus understands. And so peace is, I remember as a kid in high school, we were reading a poem one day, and for some reason it stuck with me. I don't remember who wrote the poem. Some famous guy. Anyways, I was never very good at poetry, but it was about how good walls build good neighbors. Good walls build good neighbors. Strong walls build strong neighbors. So the idea is that if you don't have walls, people get really close together, and people mix a lot. And when they mix, just because of our nature as human beings, we'll end up hating each other. We'll end up fighting. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I think she's okay. Yeah, I think she's okay. All right. Anyways, I don't know if you can see that. So a lady fell down right over here on the steps. Yeah, okay. I think she's okay. Okay, that's a first for one of my homilies. Where was I? I don't remember. What was I talking about? The gospel. So Jesus' desire for peace. So this author in the poem was saying, basically we have to have our space, we have to have our divisions, we have to have our own little areas and walls and everything for us as human beings. Otherwise, if we get too close, we just start hating each other. We start getting too close, right? And so he's reflecting on our fallen human nature. And so Jesus wants us to break through some of that by grace, by supernatural grace, so that we can be closer, that we can have a mission together as humanity. Obviously, it's the gospel. We can have that mission together, and then transcend that fallenness of ours to where we just kind of push each other away, right? Okay, so the end goal is that God creates true peace. Okay, now the example I came up with, which tends to destroy peace, is it's called the lawnmower. It's the lawnmower story. It's a lawnmower. So let's say, for example, you've got Fred over here, right? Fred over here, he's got this beautiful lawnmower. He babies this lawnmower. He loves his lawnmower. He sharpens the blade every day. He changes the oil every week. He loves this lawnmower, okay? All right, so you have Fred over here, and then you got Jim over here. Now Jim wants to borrow Fred's lawnmower. So Fred, trying to be a good Christian, trying to be a good neighbor, he says, okay, I'll loan my baby out, my lawnmower. And so he loans his lawnmower over to Jim. Well, Jim takes it and he mows a lawn that must have had landmines in it or something, because he destroys a lawnmower. The blade is dull and chipped and broken, and it doesn't run very good afterwards. And then he doesn't return it for like 6 months, right? So Fred is over here. Here he stuck his neck out, he tried to be generous, and Jim burned him bad. So in that situation, you say, okay, who screwed it up? Who really screwed it up? Well, you say, well, Jim did, because he was disrespectful. He didn't honor the generosity of Fred. He abused it. And you say, well, Jim's the problem. But I would say Fred became the problem first. Not because he loaned out his lawnmower, but because he loved his lawnmower more than he loved his neighbor. And so the scene was already set. I mean, the fact that he had shown so much attention to his lawnmower, the fact that he had, in a sense, created a little idol. And we do that all the time, especially us as men. As men, we do this very easily. And so he creates this little idol out of his lawnmower. And so even though he was being generous, he wasn't ready for the demands of true love, which it's much harder to love a neighbor than it is to love a thing. It's easier to love a thing, right? It's easier to love an animal. And so I think what you see today, people, they love their animals in some ways more than they love their neighbor. At least it feels that way. They show more affection to them. They spend more money on them. Whereas to their neighbor, it's like, I don't really like my neighbor. Whatever it is. Okay, so the problem started right at the very beginning. Really, the problem was with both of them, but it started with Fred, who loved his things more than he loved his neighbor. Now, let's go back to the second reading. I'm getting a little off track here. Okay, so in the second reading, there's an expression that John uses that I think is very, very good, and it gets at the idea that when love is broken, mercy is needed, right? Okay, so the line in it is, where is it? He says that that love is keeping God's commandments, okay? And that it is, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact words, but he's saying it's really sad when God's commandments have become burdensome. He says something went wrong when God's commandments became burdensome. So what's an example where a person may have found God's commandments to be burdensome? Well, let's say you have somebody who doesn't want to go to church on Sunday. They'd rather do something else, right? Well, the commandment then, or the rule, if you will, to go to church on Sunday became burdensome. And so what does that imply? It implies that love was broken. Because if that person's in love, they want to be there, right? You want to be with the people you love. You want to be with God if you love God. And so love was broken. And so what does that imply? Mercy, the need for mercy. And God will stretch. God will stretch out towards us, but mercy is needed, right? Because love was broken. What might be another example? Just not that this is like super common or anything, but just the example of adultery, of a lack of fidelity. And I don't even mean adultery just in one spouse who's had sexual relations with another person, but even visual adultery like pornography and even the objectification of just another human being, even for financial reasons, not necessarily sexual reasons, but even just financial reasons. Somebody who objectifies another person uses them just for their own financial gain. We call this manipulation. It's a form of adultery in a sense. And so if the opposite of that, if the rule is to not objectify other human beings, and to be faithful to all people whom we love, and especially in marriage, in that sense, to be faithful to the spouse. Well, when that becomes burdensome, what does it mean? It means love got broken. Love was broken. And so what does that imply? The need for mercy, okay? Now, in a marriage, when love gets broken, peace is lost. And so if we want the kind of peace that Jesus Christ is talking about, the kind of peace that unites in a mission and unites in something far more powerful than ourselves, then we need love. But when love is broken, what do we need? We need mercy. All right? So, okay. All right, we're going to go a little bit deeper. So the first reading In the first reading, Acts of the Apostles, you have the story where right after the resurrection, after the ascension of Jesus into heaven, after Pentecost, you have the disciples so on fire, right? Well, they decide to begin to live in community. In other words, they decide to live together. And so when they're coming together, they create some expectations, some rules. And one of them is that you have to go sell everything you own, or you have to give everything you own to the community. And so then the community is then the focal point, the mission. Everything is about what they're trying to accomplish in terms of proclaiming the gospel. And so they're sharing everything they own. Now, how well do you think that works? If I were to ask you, if I were to say, all right, now next week we're going to go sell everything we own and we're going to come and we're going to live together. So go sell your house, go sell your cars, or give them, donate them to the Catholic community. We're all going to live together. How many of you would volunteer to do that? Now, some would, but you know what? Most of us would be like, I don't think that's going to work. I just don't think that's going to work, right? Well, for 2,000 years, there's been different people who've tried to do what the apostles did, and it usually ends in disaster. I want to use this as an example of a situation where heroic love is needed. If we want to make something like that work, we have to have just incredible love for each other. And when love gets broken, we have to have incredible mercy with each other. We cannot love other things more than we love our neighbor. Has to be, you have God number one, your neighbor's number two. It has to be in that order, or else the community will break apart. It will be disaster, right? We'll just end up hating each other, kind of like that poem I mentioned. And so there has to be just something very heroically loving about that community. Well, I think the apostles had that. But if you keep reading in the Acts of the Apostles, you realize it wasn't perfect. People struggled with it. Okay, now today we still have examples, though, in the Catholic Church where we have been able to do that. So, for example, religious orders, Benedictines. You have men who live in community, you have women who live in community. And as long as they have a true fidelity to that community and to the vows that they profess, they can do that. They can have that kind of love. Now, they're still human beings, so that means that when love is broken, they still need a lot of mercy for each other. But it's nice to know that in the Catholic Church, we do have examples of that. The Benedictines, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, the Franciscans, and all the other different religious orders that are out there, they do that. Okay? All right. But let's bring it back to ourselves. For those of us who are living in, kind of just kind of in the world, but not of the world. As you think of your average family, well, husband and wife, they have to be able to have that kind of love, don't they? They have to be able to share. They have to be able to not necessarily love something over their spouse, because when they do, then it's a disaster, right? And when they do, and love gets broken, then they need a lot of mercy. So again, just bringing it back, if we want peace, true peace, where we're working together in a mission, where we're really considering our neighbor over and above ourselves, then we need love. And when love gets broken, because we live in the real world and love gets broken, then we need mercy. Okay, so mercy is very, very important. Okay, how am I doing on time? I gotta get going. All right, so one last example. So I bought my minivan a couple years ago. I bought it used from a dealership, and when I went home and I was looking through the paperwork, because I didn't look at it real super closely, it had a Carfax document which gives the history of the vehicle, and I had thumbed through it when I was buying the van, but then later on I realized as I was thumbing through it, it's like, oh man, this was a rental van. This was a rental van. And there was a moment where I was just like disgusted. It's like, oh man, hundreds, if not thousands of people have used this van. It all of a sudden, it felt like my van was cheap. It was like it had been used, and because when you buy something used, you want to buy it like from who was it, Fred, right, with the lawnmower, who babies it, and it's his little project, and that lawnmower is everything in the world. You want to buy something like that. And then to find out that it was just kind of cheap and used. But what was the problem? Well, the problem in me was that I had very quickly developed an attachment to that van, and when I thought that it was needed to be shared, a whole bunch of people, or it had been shared, my love for those people was not there. All right? Okay, so these are just a few things. The desire for true peace, which is not just the desire to get along, but a desire to work together in the mission, requires a ton of love, heroic love, saintly love, right? And because we live in the real world, love gets broken, just like in all the stories we saw today. Love gets broken, and thus we need God's mercy. All right. God bless you. I hope you're having a wonderful Easter.